I noticed something was wrong the moment my son-in-law answered my daughter's phone. It was a Tuesday in early December, 3 weeks before Christmas. I had called to ask what time they wanted me to arrive on the 25th, whether I should bring my sweet potato pie the way I always had, whether the grandchildren were still partial to the recipe with the brown sugar crust. Small questions, the kind you ask because the asking is itself a form of love. My son-in-law's voice was smooth, the way certain surfaces are smooth. Not because they are clean, but because everything rough has been carefully sanded away. He said my daughter was in the shower. He said he would pass along the message. He said Christmas was coming together beautifully, and that I should plan to arrive around 2. He did not ask about the pie. I am 69 years old. I spent 28 years as a licensed social worker in Savannah, Georgia, most of that time in family services, sitting across from people who were telling me one story with their words and a completely different story with everything else. You learn, after enough of those years, to hear what is not being said. The silence underneath a sentence. The particular quality of a pause before an answer that came just a little too easily. I thanked him and hung up and stood in my kitchen for a moment, looking at nothing. Then I told myself I was imagining things. I had been doing that more often since my husband passed, finding shadows in ordinary corners. That was grief, I knew. Grief makes you suspicious of peace. I set the phone down and went back to watering my plants. My daughter's name is Lauren. She is 41 years old, and she has her father's eyes and his laugh, the kind that starts somewhere deep before it reaches the surface. When she was small, she used to climb into my lap with a book she had already read a dozen times and ask me to read it again as if she had never heard it, just to have the company. She was never a lonely child. She was a child who understood that being close to someone was its own kind of pleasure. Her husband's name is Craig. They met at a conference in Atlanta 11 years ago, and I had tried, from the beginning, to see in him what she saw. He was organized and ambitious, and he knew how to present himself well, which is not the same thing as being a good person, though for a long time I told myself it might be. They had 2 boys. Nathaniel was 14, Samuel was 9. Both of them had Lauren's eyes. I had helped with the down payment on their house in Marietta, $47,000 in 2017, because the market was moving fast and the neighborhood was good, and they were 5,000 short, and I had it. My husband was still alive then. He had nodded at the decision and then gone back to the garden, and I had written the check. After he died, the asking had continued, differently, more gently, with more packaging around it. A medical bill that had come in higher than expected. The furnace in November. Nathaniel's braces. Lauren would call and say, "Mom, I hate to ask," and then she would ask, and I would say yes because she was my daughter and her discomfort was my discomfort, and I did not know yet how to separate those two things. Craig never called to ask. Craig never called to ask. He let Lauren carry that particular weight, which I understood later was not an accident. Christmas that year was at their house in Marietta, the way it had been for the past 4 years, ever since my husband's decline had made hosting difficult for me, and then impossible. Before he passed, the holiday had always been at mine. 31 years of that table, that kitchen, that particular smell of pine and butter, and the spiced cider my mother used to make, and that I had made ever since. After he was gone, Lauren had said, gently, that maybe it was easier if I did not have to do all that work. She had said it with love. I believed that. So I drove the 40 minutes to Marietta each Christmas with my pie in the back seat and my overnight bag, and I tried not to notice how much the holiday felt like visiting rather than belonging. The 25th arrived with the kind of Georgia winter that cannot decide if it wants to be cold. I left Savannah at noon, drove through that flat gray landscape with the heat on low and the radio playing something instrumental I did not pay much attention to. I thought about my husband. I thought about Nathaniel and Samuel, who I had not seen since Thanksgiving, which had also been at their house, which had also been fine, mostly. I arrived at 2 as instructed. Lauren answered the door with a smile that was real but brief, the way a smile is when someone has been managing something difficult and the management has not quite finished. She hugged me, took my pie, said it looked beautiful, and then Craig was in the hallway, phone in hand, nodding at me the way you nod at a neighbor whose name you cannot quite remember. The boys were upstairs. I could hear them. The house looked the way it always did at Christmas, decorated with the particular precision that was Craig's influence, not Lauren's. He had a taste for the expensive and the symmetrical. The tree was artificial, white lights only, ornaments in 2 colors. The mantel held candles and glass hurricanes, all the same height. It was beautiful, and it felt like a hotel lobby. I was set up in the guest room, which was also Craig's home office. The pull-out sofa had been made up with a fitted sheet and a blanket and one pillow from the closet. The desk along the wall held two monitors, both in sleep mode, and a shelf of business books with spines that had never been cracked. Nathaniel came in while I was setting down my bag. He was tall now in the way of boys who grow faster than they expect to. Slightly surprised by their own height, he hugged me without being asked, which his brother did not always do. He said, "Grandma, I made a playlist for tonight. I put some of that old stuff you like on there." I told him I could not wait to hear it. He hesitated in the doorway for a moment after that, like he wanted to say something else. Then he just said, "It's good you're here," and went back down the hall. I sat on the edge of the pullout and looked at the room and thought about what I had driven 40 minutes for. The answer was him, and Samuel, and Lauren, when Craig was not in the room with her. Dinner was at 6. The table was set for 7, Lauren and Craig at the heads, the boys on one side, Craig's younger brother and his girlfriend filling 2 chairs on the other side, and me in the remaining seat near the kitchen doorway, with my back to the room. I did not say anything about the seating. I had been raised by a woman who understood that some things you address and some things you absorb, and that wisdom is knowing the difference. I was not yet sure which category this was. Craig's brother was named Trevor, which is a name on a list I now keep for reasons I will explain. He was pleasant in a surface way, and spent most of dinner talking to Craig about a real estate opportunity in Chattanooga they had apparently discussed before. His girlfriend smiled at the appropriate moments and did not say much. The food was catered. I learned this when I offered to help Lauren bring things out, and she said, "It's already set up, they left everything in the warmers." I asked who they were. She said Craig had found a service. She said it was just easier. I had brought my sweet potato pie, and Lauren had put it on the counter, and it sat there through the entire meal without being brought to the table, while a store-bought pumpkin cheesecake took the center position at dessert. I ate what was in front of me and listened to a conversation I was not part of. Craig talked about the Chattanooga property. Trevor asked questions. Lauren refilled water glasses. The boys ate quickly and asked to be excused. I helped Samuel cut his meat because his mother was at the other end of the table and did not see that he needed it, and he looked at me with the specific gratitude of a 9-year-old who was used to waiting. After dinner, Craig and Trevor went to the study. Lauren cleaned up with the efficiency of someone who had learned that the faster things were done, the less she had to think about them. I dried dishes beside her, and we talked about small things, her book club, a show she had been watching, whether the boys needed new winter coats. It was the most natural 30 minutes of the day. Before I went to sleep that night, I found a card slipped under the guest room door. It was from Nathaniel, handwritten, 3 lines. He had written, "I know things get weird sometimes. Just want you to know I see how much you love us. Merry Christmas, Grandma." I held it for a long time before I turned out the light. I drove home the day after Christmas. Lauren had hugged me at the door, a long hug, the kind she gave when she was sorry about something she could not say out loud. I had kissed her cheek and told her I loved her and meant it completely and without condition. Craig had said, "Drive safe," and gone back inside. On the highway home, somewhere around the Pooler exit, my phone rang through the car speaker. It was a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail. By the time I pulled into my driveway, there was a voicemail waiting. Not from that number. From my attorney. His name was Franklin. I had worked with him twice before, once when my husband and I updated our wills after the grandchildren were born, and once when I handled the estate after my husband passed. He was a careful man, unhurried, the kind who did not call unless the reason was specific. His message said he had received some correspondence I should know about. He asked me to come in when I had a chance. His voice had the measured neutrality of someone who has learned to deliver information without preloading it with alarm. I called him back from my driveway. He answered. He said he had received a letter 2 weeks earlier from a law firm in Atlanta, inquiring about the process for petitioning for conservatorship of an adult family member who might benefit from assisted financial management. The letter had been sent on behalf of a family member not yet identified by name in the initial inquiry, but the property address listed in the correspondence was mine. My house. The house my husband and I bought in 1994, the house where I had raised my daughter and watched her grow up, and sent her into a life she had built for herself. My house, which was paid off entirely, which had appreciated over 30 years in a neighborhood that had gotten quieter and greener and more valuable with time. I sat in the car with the engine still running and asked Franklin to read me the exact language. He read it. Conservatorship. Assisted financial oversight. Voluntary or court-ordered. For seniors who may have diminished capacity. I had not diminished. I held a graduate degree. I had managed my own finances, my own property, and my own life for 31 years with a partner and for 4 years without one. My last cognitive assessment, done routinely by my physician 18 months ago, had come back with no concerns noted, but someone had contacted my attorney asking how to take that from me. I asked Franklin if the letter had identified who had initiated the inquiry. He said not directly, but the law firm's address was in Buckhead, and he had looked them up. They specialized in estate planning and asset transfer, not elder care. Asset transfer, I thanked him. I told him I would be in his office on Thursday morning. Then I sat in my driveway with the engine running for a while longer. The magnolia in my front yard was bare in the December cold, the same one I had planted the spring after Nathaniel was born, because I believed in marking the arrival of new people with something living. My husband had teased me about it. He had said, "You are going to be very busy planting trees if you keep this up every time someone you love shows up in the world." I turned off the engine. I went inside. I opened my laptop and I sat at my kitchen table and I went through my financial accounts the way I had not done in some time. Not out of carelessness, but out of the particular trust that can calcify into inattention if you are not careful. What I found took me a moment to understand. 4 years earlier, 6 weeks after my husband's funeral, I had added Lauren as a secondary holder on one of my savings accounts. I remembered the reasoning. I had been in grief that was still fresh and physical, the kind that makes the future feel unreliable, and I had wanted someone to have access in case something happened to me. Lauren had been with me at the bank. She had been gentle and patient that day, and I had trusted her completely, which I still did. What I had not noticed, because I had not looked closely, was that the account had been accessed 9 times in the past 14 months. Not Lauren's login. A separate authorized user added 11 months ago whose name I had not put there. Craig. He was listed as a secondary authorized user on my savings account. His access had been added 11 months ago in January when Lauren had come to visit alone for a long weekend, and we had spent time going through some of my husband's remaining paperwork. I had signed several things that weekend. She had brought a folder and said they were related to the estate, loose ends from my husband's trust that needed clearing. I had signed them. I had trusted her and, by extension, trusted the man she had chosen, and I had signed. I did not sleep well that night. The next morning I was at my bank when it opened. I asked to speak with the branch manager, a woman named Patricia, who I had worked with before, on account matters related to my husband's estate. She was thorough and did not make me feel like an inconvenience, which is rarer than it should be. I showed her the account access log. I asked her to walk me through when Craig's name had been added and by what method. She pulled the records. It had been added on a Saturday morning in January of the previous year, in person, with a form signed by the account holder. By me, my signature on a document I had no memory of reviewing as an account modification. I asked her what his access level was. She checked. Full access. Withdrawal privileges included. Patricia did not flinch. She had been doing this long enough to know that what I was describing was not unusual and was not my fault, and she communicated both of those things without saying either directly. I asked her to remove Craig's name from every account I held at that institution. I asked her to change every password and security question before I left the building. I asked her to flag my accounts for any future modification requests, requiring in-person verification with a photo ID that was mine. While she was working through the changes, she paused and turned her screen slightly toward me. There had been an attempted transfer 11 days earlier from my savings account, $2,000 initiated remotely, which had been flagged and held pending confirmation because of a security protocol she had updated in the fall. The confirmation request had been sent to my phone number. I had received a text in late November that I had assumed was a routine bank notification and had dismissed without reading carefully. The transfer had not gone through, but it had been attempted. I felt something then that was not anger and not grief. It was the specific cold clarity of a person who has been deceived by someone they were still in the process of loving. It does not arrive loudly. It arrives the way a diagnosis does, quietly in a room that seems ordinary, until the moment it is not. Freeze everything, I said. Every account. All of it. Patricia nodded and turned back to the keyboard, and we worked through the rest without stopping. I left the bank at 10:30 and drove directly to Franklin's office. He rose when I came in, the way he always did, and poured coffee without asking, and sat down across from me with his hands folded and waited for me to start. I told him everything in order: the conservatorship inquiry, the account access, the January documents I had signed without understanding what I was signing, the attempted transfer. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's something else I should tell you." He had received a second piece of correspondence, which had arrived after his initial voicemail to me. It was from the same Atlanta firm. More specific this time. It referenced property at my address, referred to it as an estate asset with significant unrealized value, and outlined initial steps for a voluntary transfer mechanism that could be structured as a gift to avoid certain probate complications. A gift deed. They wanted to walk me into signing my house over to them. The language said voluntary. The timing said otherwise. I looked at my attorney across the desk and I said, "What do I need to do?" He said, "We start today." We spent the rest of that morning removing Craig's name from every document in which he appeared as a connected party to my estate, not Lauren, Craig. Lauren was still my daughter, and I was still her mother, and whatever was coming next between us, it would not be conducted through legal instruments. But Craig's name, in any capacity that touched what I had spent a lifetime building, was being excised cleanly and completely. Franklin also drafted a letter to the Atlanta firm, informing them that I was fully competent, legally represented, and that any future correspondence regarding my assets should be directed to his office, and that any petition for conservatorship would be contested with the full documentation of my professional history, my financial records, and a current physician's assessment of my cognitive health, which I would be obtaining as a precaution. He said, "You should also update your will." I told him I had already been thinking about it. We sat for another hour after that. By the time we finished, my estate was restructured. Everything would pass into a trust for Nathaniel and Samuel to be managed by a trustee independent of their parents until each of them turned 25. Franklin would serve as the trustee with a backup named from his firm. Lauren was listed as a beneficiary in a secondary capacity for a specific sum, ring-fenced and separate. Craig was not listed anywhere. I signed each document with the same steadiness I had brought to 30 years of intake reports and case assessments and custody decisions and placement reviews. I had made harder decisions than this. I had made them with less certainty. This one required almost none at all. On the drive home, I stopped at my physician's office and asked the front desk to schedule a cognitive assessment at the earliest opening. The receptionist, a young man who had just started and who was still figuring out how to manage the weight of other people's appointments, looked up and said, "Is everything okay?" I said, "Everything is fine. I just want documentation." He nodded and found me a slot the following week. I got home in the early afternoon, made myself lunch, and sat at the kitchen table while the house settled around me in the way it had been settling for 30 years. Outside, the magnolia stood bare and patient in the yard. The cold had stripped it back to what it was. It looked smaller without the leaves. It also looked exactly like itself. My phone had been quiet all morning. It changed around 3 o'clock. The first message was from Lauren. It said, "Craig tried to make a transfer from his account and it was declined. He's calling the bank, but they're not helping. Did something happen with the accounts?" Then a call I did not answer. Then another message. "Mom, I'm confused. Please call me back." Then, 40 minutes later, a message from Craig directly. I had not heard from Craig directly in months. The message said, "I don't know what you've done, but we have bills due, and this is going to cause serious problems. I need you to contact your bank and resolve this today." The instruction at the end of that sentence. The word resolve. As if I were a service department he had been mishandled by. I made coffee. I sat with it. I watched a cardinal on the magnolia branch outside the window. Lauren's car was in my driveway by 4:30. She was alone. She knocked the way she had knocked on my door her entire life. 2 soft knocks, and then a pause. A habit from childhood that she had never lost. I opened the door and she looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her since she was in her 20s, and had made a decision she could not take back, and had come home to tell me. She said, "Mom, can I come in?" I stepped back. She came in and sat on the couch and did not look around the room the way she sometimes did, cataloging it the way you catalog things you expect one day to inherit. She just looked at her hands. I sat in my reading chair, the one near the window, and waited. She said, "Craig told me it was standard planning. He said it was just making sure everything was organized in case something happened to you. He said lawyers did this kind of thing all the time for family estates, that it protected everyone." I did not say anything. She said, "I didn't read what I put in front of you that weekend in January." He gave me the folder. He told me it was the trust paperwork. I should have read it. I know I should have read it. I know I should have read it. I didn't. I looked at my daughter. I had known her for 41 years. I had been present for her first steps, and her first heartbreak, and her wedding, and the birth of both of her children. I knew the difference between her performing remorse and her feeling it, and what I was looking at was a woman who was feeling it so completely that she could barely stay upright under the weight of it. I said, "Did you know about the conservatorship inquiry?" She shook her head. She said, "Not until last week. He mentioned it in passing. He made it sound like he was just asking questions. Getting ahead of things. I thought it was the kind of thing he did. Planning ahead. I didn't." She stopped. She said, "I didn't ask enough questions. I kept telling myself he was doing it for us, that I was tired and he was taking care of things, and that was what you were supposed to let your partner do." I said, "You let him take care of me." She looked up. I said, "You handed him the folder. You sat in my kitchen while I signed documents I couldn't clearly see on a day when I was still grieving your father. And you did not read what was in them." The room was very quiet. She said, "Yes. I let that sit between us for a while. Then I said, I am not asking you to choose between him and me. That is your marriage, and those are your children, and that is your life. What I am telling you is that what was attempted against me is real and documented, and I have taken every step necessary to protect myself. And I am telling you that whatever you decide to do from here, I need you to understand what happened clearly enough to say, yes, you understand it." She said she understood it. I believed her. I had known her for 41 years. She asked if she could call me more. She said she wanted things to be different between us, that she had felt the distance growing and had let herself believe it was normal, that families contracted and it was fine, that she would have more time for the relationship after the boys were older, after things settled down. She said she had been telling herself that for 3 years. I said, "You can call me whenever you want. I will always pick up." She left an hour later. She did not know what she was going to say to Craig. I did not tell her what to say. That was not mine to direct. What followed was a quiet I had almost forgotten was available to me. No unexpected charges appearing in my account summary. No calls that began with "Mom, I hate to ask." No request moving through Lauren as intermediary, soft-voiced and apologetic, toward a need that was always specifically financial. My phone sat on the counter, and the days moved at my own pace. And I cooked what I wanted and read in the evenings and walked the neighborhood each morning. 2 miles, the route I had walked for 15 years, past the houses whose inhabitants I knew by observation, if not by name. On the 8th morning after the bank, Nathaniel called. Not texted, called. He said, "Grandma, I wanted to make sure you were okay. Mom's been different this week, and I didn't know what was happening, and I just wanted to hear your voice." I told him I was okay. I told him I was more than okay. I told him that sometimes when things got complicated, it was because grown-ups were in the middle of figuring something out, and that the figuring out was hard, but it was also necessary, and that he did not need to carry any of it. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I meant what I wrote in that card." "I know," I said. "I have it on my nightstand." He said he would call again next week. I told him I would be here. 2 weeks after Christmas, Lauren called to tell me she and Craig were seeing a couples counselor. She said it in the careful way of someone who is not sure how the information will be received, who has learned to protect herself against reactions that may or may not come. I told her I was glad. I told her that whatever they worked through or did not work through, the boys had a mother who was paying attention now, and that mattered more than anything else. She cried a little. I let her. When we hung up, I sat in my reading chair and looked out the window at the magnolia in the yard and thought about my husband. I thought about what he would have said about all of it. He was not a man who spoke in long sentences when short ones would do. He would have said something like, "You handled it," and then asked what was for dinner. And that would have been enough. I had been handling things for 69 years. I had handled a career and a household and a grief and a daughter and a set of grandchildren I would walk through weather for. I had handled it when handling it was easy, and I had handled it when it was the hardest thing available to me. What I had not done for too long was protect the handling. I understood now that protecting it was not the same as being hard. It was not the same as withholding love or building a wall or deciding that the people who had let you down were no longer worth the trouble. It was simply the recognition that you were a person with a life of your own construction, built from decades of decisions and labor and sacrifice and love, and that the life you had built deserved the same care you had given to everyone else's. My physician's assessment came back clean, as I had known it would. Franklin added it to my file. Craig's name remained off every document. The trust for the boys was properly structured and filed and held by a trustee who had no personal stake in any of it. Nathaniel called on Sunday afternoons, which became a habit I looked forward to all week. Samuel sent me voice messages that were mostly about things that had happened at school and were rarely less than 4 minutes long. I listened to every second of them. One Saturday in late January, I brought my sweet potato pie to Lauren's house for no occasion at all. She had called and said, "Do you want to come for lunch?" Just us and the boys. Craig was at a golf thing and would not be back until evening. I said yes. We ate at the kitchen table, the small one near the window that the boys had always preferred over the formal dining room. Samuel asked for seconds of the pie before he had finished the first slice. Nathaniel showed me the playlist he had been building, earbuds in one ear for me and one for him. Leaned in close, the way teenagers only lean in when they are genuinely interested in something and have forgotten to perform indifference. Lauren and I cleaned up after, side by side, the way we had stood in her kitchen on Christmas night. But this time, the quiet between us was not the silence of things being managed. It was the silence of two people who had known each other for a long time and had decided, without ceremony, to keep going. She said, "I'm sorry, Mom." She said it simply, without a structure built around it, without anything attached to the end. I said, "I know. I believe you." She handed me a dish to dry. I dried it. Outside the window, the January light was thin and flat and entirely honest, the way winter light is when it has given up trying to flatter anything and is just there. I thought about all the mornings I had started by measuring my worth against what someone needed from me. All the years I had made myself smaller in the rooms of people I loved because smaller felt like safer and safer felt like staying. I was 69 years old. I had a house that was mine, a will that said what I intended it to say, accounts that belonged only to me, and a physician's letter confirming what I already knew. I had a granddaughter who called on Sunday afternoons, and a 9-year-old who left me voice messages about cafeteria incidents, and a daughter who was beginning, slowly and imperfectly, to come back to herself. I had a magnolia in my yard that had lived through 30 winters and was not finished yet. Standing in that kitchen with a dish towel in my hand and the January light coming through the window, and my daughter next to me not saying anything that needed to be said, I thought about the woman I had been at 40, at 50, at 60, the one who had believed that love required absorption. That sacrifice was the grammar of belonging. That a woman who protected herself was a woman who had stopped caring. I had been wrong about that for a very long time. But I knew it now. I knew it standing in a kitchen in Marietta on a Saturday in January, with sweet potato pie on the counter, and a boys' playlist still running quietly from a phone left on the table. And I held the knowing the way you hold something you have waited a long time for, steadily, without surprise, with the particular gratitude of a person who understands that it arrived exactly when it was supposed to. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since that December, not in any abstract way, in the specific practical way of a woman who spent nearly 3 decades watching families come apart and come back together, and who learned that the way things end is almost always traceable to a decision made long before anyone was paying attention. I gave Craig access to my life because I trusted Lauren, and I trusted Lauren because she was mine, and because grief had made me want to hold her closer, not examine the papers she handed me. That is the honest version. I signed what I did not read on a day when I was not fully present, and he knew that, and he used it. The cause was not my weakness. The cause was my willingness to love in a way that did not protect itself. And the effect eventually was a conservatorship inquiry with my address on it and a transfer attempt at a number that was not small. What I understand now is that intelligence without boundaries is not wisdom. I had spent my career being perceptive about other people's situations, and almost deliberately blind to the architecture of my own. I could read a family in a first meeting and know where the pressure was being applied and by whom. But inside my own home, inside my own love for my daughter, I had let that perception go soft. I told myself it was trust. It was actually avoidance. There is a difference, and learning to feel it is one of the harder things a person can do. The moral part is this: what Craig did was a choice he made freely, over time, with planning behind it. He did not stumble into it. He identified an asset, assessed the person holding it, and moved methodically toward access. That kind of behavior does not arrive from nowhere. It comes from years of watching that behavior go unchallenged, from a household where the cost of taking never came due. When I removed his access, it was not punishment. It was simply the first time the cost arrived. He had been making the same kind of decisions for years. The ledger had just finally been shown to him. Lauren is harder to think about, because she was not a villain in this. She was a woman who had learned to let someone else manage the difficult things and had stopped asking what the management actually looked like. That is a failure of courage, not of character. And courage, unlike character, can be rebuilt. I have watched her rebuilding it, slowly, imperfectly, the way actual change happens, rather than the way we imagine it will. Nathaniel is 14 and he already knows how to see people clearly without making them feel seen. That is a rare thing. You either have it or you spend a lifetime developing it, and he arrived with it mostly intact. I told him once that the most useful thing a person can carry is the ability to notice what is actually happening rather than what they wish were happening. He nodded in the way he nods when something lands and he wants to hold it without making a thing of it. That is his father's patience in a body that chose better. What I want for them, for Nathaniel and Samuel, and for Lauren if she keeps doing the work, is the kind of life that does not require someone else's diminishment to sustain itself. That is the only version of a good life I have ever believed in. Not wealth, not comfort, not the appearance of a family that has everything arranged correctly. Just a life you built with your own hands that does not cost the people who love you anything they were not willing to give. I am 69 years old and I live alone in a house that is entirely mine and I am not finished yet.